So hi, everyone. Welcome to our press briefing about preventing gun violence. I'm Stephanie Murray. I'm the director of the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. And this is one in a series of events that we host to bring newsmakers together with independent, hyperlocal, ethnic, and community media across New Jersey on topics of importance in the news. And today's topic is at the top of a lot of people's minds across this country and is an incredibly important one. So today we're going to be discussing gun violence in New Jersey and how we can prevent it. And we'll be joined by the Reverend Robert Moore, who will join us in just a moment. Before we get started, I do want to say that this press briefing and all of our press briefings throughout the year are supported thanks to funding from the Democracy Fund and the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation. So we're really grateful for their funding because that allows us to do these sorts of events for you. So if you have any questions for our guest, you can feel free to use the reactions button and raise your hand or drop your questions in the chat. This will be a pretty informal back and forth. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Oni Advincula to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Stephanie, and good afternoon, everyone. And again, welcome to today's press briefing on gun safety and violence prevention in New Jersey. My name is Oni Advincula. I am the project coordinator for community and ethnic media programs at the Center for Cooperative Media, and I will be your moderator for this briefing. Today, we have a very special guest, the Reverend Robert Moore, to give us a full background on the issue, specifically on how we can help end the mass shooting. Reverend Moore is Executive Director of Coalition for Peace Action, a regional organization dedicated to global abolition of nuclear weapons, a peace economy, and a halt to weapons trafficking. We can find his complete bio in the fact sheet, and we also posted that in the chat room. And before we give the floor to Reverend Moore, the fact sheet, I have to say, has been edited, and the edited version is also posted in the chat. I believe Stephanie posted that earlier on top of the chat. So Reverend Moore will give us a 15-minute presentation, and then we will open it to reporters, to all of you for the Q&A. And in the meantime, please post your questions in the chat box if you have any, and we will call your name at the end of Reverend Moore's presentation. So with no further introduction, let's all welcome Reverend Moore.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you. I enjoy the kind of engagement that I've had over the years with members of the press, and so it's a special honor to be interacting with all of you. So thanks for the invitation. I'm going to start a little bit historically. We know, of course, at the macro level, before I launch into that, that the epidemic of gun violence has gone from not bad to worse, but from very, very bad to much worse in recent years. And at the national level, last year we reached 45,000 deaths at the hand of a gun in America. That's the highest it's ever been in our history. And it's very alarming. That's, by the way, if you want to average it out, one American dying every 12 minutes at the hand of a gun. And so we are not immune from that problem in New Jersey, but as I'll explain as I go along, partly or largely because of our strong gun violence prevention laws, or some people call them gun safety laws. We use both terms. By the way, we tend to stay away from gun control because in a way that cedes some of the reality. We're talking about common sense gun safety measures. We're not talking about seizing guns away from people or anything like that. But as you well know, the NRA and our opponents likes to characterize our position that way, but it's totally false and wrong. So, you know, we now have an average of 2 mass shootings a week in this country. And as I was telling the New Jersey Assembly Judiciary Committee yesterday, we are an outlier. The United States of America is an outlier among developed nations No other developed nation has a gun violence problem that is remotely close to the epidemic we have in this country. In fact, on average, the United States has 25 times per capita the level of gun violence of other developed countries. So this is really, really disastrous for the well-being of our country, for saving lives, and so on. So we in the Coalition for Peace Action got involved in gun violence prevention. I was already on the board of Ceasefire New Jersey when it was a separate organization that came under our umbrella in 2010. I was already on its board, but the chair of the board called me in March of 1993. And he called me because we had been working against an NRA effort to rescind New Jersey's assault weapons ban. So this is where I want to start in the history that I'm going to share with you. New Jersey was close to tied with California for having the first assault weapons ban in the country. Both of us did that in 1991. Jim Florio was our governor. But later that year, the NRA pumped a lot of money into New Jersey's legislative elections and succeeded at electing a veto-proof pro-NRA majority in both houses of the legislature. This was bad news, very grim. And a couple of years later, in March of 1993, they said, we're going to call in our chits and we're going to rescind New Jersey's assault weapons ban. And the first vote was literally in the middle of the night in the New Jersey Assembly. What they were voting on was to override. They had already voted by majorities to rescind, and they had to then, Governor Florio vetoed that. They had to get a 2/3 majority at that point to override it, and they did so in the New Jersey Assembly. 3 weeks later, the vote was scheduled in the New Jersey State Senate. So we were working day and night during those 3 weeks. And, one of the mantras we were using is, this is a weapon of war. It does not belong in civilian communities. It's designed for the battlefield. So the vote came up. We had been generating phone calls to our state senators, and I was going around to the faith community leaders all over the state. We were working very closely with Governor Florio and other allies. The vote took place then after the end of that 3 weeks. And I was in the state Senate that day, and it was the closest thing to a political miracle, a legislative miracle that I've ever seen. We just had to keep the number of senators voting for the rescission, voting to override Governor. We had to keep that to 2/3 or less. As the votes got tallied, in the end, there was not a single New Jersey state senator that voted to rescind the ban. Not even one. A few abstained. And everyone was shocked. How did this happen? So
I think Reverend Moore froze.
Yeah, I believe he.
Oh, wait, looks like you're coming back. Reverend Moore, if you can hear us, we can't hear you. You froze.
in the Trenton, is somebody unmuted?
You're good now. Keep going. We lost you for about a minute there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem.
The state senator in our area, I was just kind of coming up to the culmination of this success story. It was wildly successful, much more than I expected. So just to repeat, not a single New Jersey state senator voted to rescind the ban. A few abstained. And when our local state senator for our area was asked, why did you vote that way? He voted to keep the ban. He said, because I got 1,000 phone calls and 90% of them said keep the ban. So this is stuff that the majority of our citizens, both in New Jersey and across the country, it's common sense. Don't let weapons of war be on our streets. Don't let them be accessible to civilians. Otherwise, bad things happen. And so we know, in fact, for those mass shootings, that is the weapon of choice for mass shooters, is an assault weapon, because you can kill a lot of people in a very short amount of time. So we thankfully showed that the NRA stranglehold could be broken. A year later, the national assault weapons ban was passed. The only thing was, and by the way, during the 10 years it was in effect, the number of mass shootings in the United States with assault weapons went down by 70%. This is just common sense. If it's harder to get your hands on it, so unlike the national ban, it had a grandfather clause. So if you already had one, you could keep it. So obviously that left quite a few in circulation. New Jersey's didn't have that clause. If you had one already, you had to either disable it and keep it in a gun display place, or turn it into law enforcement, and deadlines were given and so forth. So we've been a lot safer. And think about one of the most recent mass shootings in Buffalo. Unfortunately, New York State actually has relatively strong gun safety laws, but it did not have as strong a ones as New Jersey. So it did not have a ban on assault weapons on its books. Hence, this 18-year-old violent white supremacist could get his hands, go out and buy one easily, and passed the background check, and did a horrible, horrifying shooting in Buffalo, as we all know. So this is the pattern, and we can stop it. We can stop it. So we have continued to work on gun safety laws and on strengthening. New Jersey has what is considered, according to the Giffords Law Center, what is considered to be the second strongest gun safety laws in the country. And as a result, we have the third lowest per capita rate of gun violence. So I think the evidence is overwhelming that these common sense gun safety laws work. They reduce the rate of gun violence. Obviously, in our mind, we'd like to get it down to zero, but a significant reduction is worth doing for sure. So that's kind of the attitude that we've had for some years. Pretty soon after ceasefire came under our umbrella, Governor Christie was governor, as you know, Republican governor, and he vetoed pretty much almost every gun safety bill that came to his desk. There were only two exceptions so this was a very slow time in terms of strengthening our gun safety laws during his 2 terms. The first one was a bill to keep guns away from domestic abusers. This is very, very important, by the way. Domestic abusers are highly inclined to use a gun if it's easily accessible to them. And that means that the person who's being victimized, most often a woman, by the way, has a much higher chance of dying in a domestic abuse situation, way, way higher chance, and it's only common sense, if there is a gun in that home. And so this was a good common sense measure. It had bipartisan support and it did pass, and I thank God for that. And then on his very last day in office, some of you remember the Nevada mass shooting, over 550 people killed in one episode. I mean, if you want to talk about turning an American city into a battlefield, that was the example. That was the example. And one of the things that enabled that crazed shooter to do that is he had what are called bump stocks. That basically turns a semi-automatic rifle where you're having to pull the trigger for each shot that's fired. It turns it instead into a full-fledged machine gun. Machine guns are banned, by the way, and have been for a long time. So he did sign a bump stock ban on his last day in office, literally hours before he was going to leave office. And I think by then he probably knew that he was planning a run for president, so he didn't want to have a lot of debate or a lot of hoopla about it, so it didn't get all that much attention. So that's some of the history. Now let me go forward to a little more recently. I'm just taking a look at my watch, and I think I have a little less than 5 minutes left. Only, so let me just move toward wrapping up. We have, when Governor Murphy became governor in January of 2018, he had pledged, as you recall, during his campaign, that he was going to try to strengthen New Jersey's gun violence prevention laws. And he has followed through on that pledge. And we had an 8-bill package that passed in 2018. We lobbied intensively for that. It had strong support in the legislature, but in many ways that reflected the strong support that's among our citizens for these common sense measures. Now let me just digress for a moment, because one of the bills passed, and I want to give you a real life example, not just a statistic, was that in that package was an extreme risk protection order law. ERPO is the shorthand, or the acronym rather. A lot of people call them red flag laws. That's likely to try to better fund those, at least at the national level, is one of the things that's likely to be in the package that's now going to be voted on soon at the national level, thank God. These already, so the way a red flag law works is law enforcement or a family member or even a neighbor can go to a judge and say, this person has a gun and I have good reason to believe, and they have to have it documented, of course, that they're likely to use it to hurt themselves or others in the near future. If the judge is persuaded by that argument, the judge can order the immediate removal of those guns. It's not permanent. The person after a while can petition to have their guns back, but it's an immediate removal. So here's a great example of why that's so important. We often think of these kinds of guns and these kinds of crimes being done in urban areas. Well, there was a young man in Princeton soon after this law took effect in January of 2019. It's been invoked 1,000 times so far, by the way. One of those 1,000 times was a case here in Princeton. And this young man who lived in Princeton had accumulated a large cache of guns. And on Facebook, he was saying he intended to go to the Walmart in Hamilton, New Jersey, just a town or two over from here, and do a mass shooting there. Well, law enforcement saw that, and it petitioned the judge to go and remove whatever guns that young man had. And that they did it. And I believe that that may have prevented the exact kind of mass shooting here in New Jersey that we've been seeing all over the country. So these laws work. They are shown to work over and over. The next year, we passed another, in 2019, 6 laws. Now, one of the things in those, some of these included funding because they're hospital-based violence prevention efforts. So what they fund, and by the way, the latest funding for that package is $10 million. What they fund are called violence interrupters. So we aren't just focused on the actual gun laws, we're focused on how do you get into the social milieu and interrupt. For example, if somebody's in the hospital having been shot by a gun, and let's say they're a member of a rival gang, one of the first things they're going to think of when they get discharged is, let me take revenge. I'm going to get my gun and take revenge. The violence interrupters are trained people who start working with those folks while they're still in the hospital, and then continue to work with them to say, that's not the best way to go to try to resolve your anger or your thirst for revenge. We need to find better ways. And so they're members of the same community that these people come from. That's proven to be a very effective way of preventing gun violence too. Now, right now, here I'm getting very close to the finish. We have another package. We didn't do much during the pandemic. It's hard, of course. This legislature was only meeting on Zoom and things like that. So we now have a new package of gun safety bills. And I just testified yesterday morning, in fact, at the Assembly Judiciary Committee. So that package is now making its way through the New Jersey legislature. These also are very good common sense gun safety laws. Here's an example. There's been a lot of talk about raising the age to purchase a gun to 21. So one of the first laws that was heard yesterday in the New Jersey Assembly Judiciary Committee was a bill that so happens Assemblyman Fryman is one of the lead sponsors. He's one of my assemblymen for here in Princeton. And so basically to buy any gun in New Jersey, you would have to be over 21. Until now, you've been able to buy a rifle or a shotgun and by only being 18 years old. I hope that becomes a model. I hope the same pattern that was shown where New Jersey went first on the assault weapons ban, and a year later, the national government adopted that, the National Congress. So I hope that we have a similar dynamic. We're trying to make New Jersey's laws very strong laws, even stronger, even better. Why? Because it saves lives. We are about life-saving measures by preventing gun violence. And I think I've used up my 15 to 20 minutes only, so I'm happy to hear from the members of the press that are on this briefing.
Thank you, Reverend Moore. Yes, we have a few questions. Some of them are in the chat box. The first one is from Steve Lubitkin of the State Broadcast News.com. Steve, if you can ask your question, please.
Sure, thanks, Oni. Reverend Moore, I just would like to get your reaction to this morning's Supreme Court decision, how you think that is going to affect New Jersey's ability to control gun violence, and what kind of sense you have of what it might do for gun violence nationwide.
I'm alarmed by it. I'm not surprised by it, but I'm deeply alarmed by it. This idea that having more and more guns out there is what's going to make us safe, having them easier to carry out into the public is going to be what makes us safe. That does not hold up to any common sense analysis. It's just wrong. The more guns you have out there, the more chance that they're going to get used. And so, you know, look, I had the experience of marching the Mother's Day after the Newtown mass shooting from New Jersey, where we have strong laws, no public carry, no concealed carry, you have to show a valid reason, etc. We marched over into a park in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, marched over the bridge. And when we got there, there were probably 50 armed protesters to try to undermine our protests. I think it's corrosive to democracy. I think it puts more lives in danger. It is deeply alarming, and it shows how seductive this myth is that the NRA keep promoting, that the only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Just one last thing. If you want any proof that that doesn't hold up to scrutiny, look at the Buffalo shooter. There was a 30-year veteran of the Buffalo police force, was an armed guard protecting that store. He was unable to shoot the guy. He ended up getting shot and killed himself because the guy was wearing body armor, etc. And so a good guy with a gun with a lot of experience was unable to stop a mass shooter. It just doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
Thank you. Our second question is actually from Stephanie, and some of these questions I will just have to read it from the chat. Stephanie says, how do you think today's—
That was the same question, Oni, sorry.
That was the same question?
Yeah, that was the same question as Steve asked.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's move on to Carlos Roa's question. He actually has 3 questions. What does Reverend Moore think about senators reaching that bipartisan compromise on gun violence bill? Second question is, Supreme Court strikes down New York concealed gun law. And then the third one, I don't see the third one.
I don't see a third one there.
Yeah, yeah.
I've got my chat box open, and I just want to make sure that I hear and understand accurately what the questions are. So you know, this is the first gun safety laws that are poised to pass in the federal Congress in 26 years. I think that's shameful. I think the fact that we've had this long of a pause is shameful. We have not been making the citizens of this country safer. This is why we have a very much worse epidemic of gun violence than we should. As I said, at least 25 times worse than any other country. And by the way, when I speak of other countries, let me digress for just a moment. Australia had a mass shooting in 1996. One shooter shot and killed 35 people. Well, Australia then said, we can't let this happen again. And they very quickly passed a ban on assault weapons and made everyone who already had a weapon turn theirs in. Now, they got compensated for that. So there was not a financial loss. There's only been one mass shooting in Australia since then, and it was of 7 people in the same family. So it was more of a domestic violence situation. So we know that these situations don't have to be. The same thing with New Zealand, when that horrible, horrible shooter shot up a mosque and killed dozens and dozens of worshipers. New Zealand did the same thing. They said, we're banning assault weapons. This is just common sense. Don't let the public easily get their hands on a weapon of mass destruction. Just don't let it happen. So we need to pass new laws. The laws that are being considered are relatively low on the priority list of the kinds of things I've been talking about, but they're better than nothing. And one of them, to try to strengthen the red flag laws, I've already given you an example of how effective those can be here in New Jersey. I think that's something that we do know works. Even when President Trump first heard about it, he was enthralled with it until Wayne LaPierre, the head of the NRA, went to the White House late that same night and basically told them, you got to back off. So a lot of these politicians are in the pocket of the NRA, and we've got to fight back against that, and we can't. I've already given you an example of how we did that in 1993, and we've done it other times since then. We can defeat this very negative view. We have so much fear in this country, so much. Did you know, in fact, that since the year 2000, the rate of purchase in America has increased by 500% in those 22 years among Americans. This is why we have more guns than citizens in this country now. We're up to just shy of 400 million guns. It has not made us safer. This is a myth. It's a myth that has captured the imagination that the NRA keeps repeating over and over. It does not hold up to scrutiny. It makes us less safe. If you have a gun in your home, and I actually urge people to really think carefully about that, you're allowed to, under the Supreme Court ruling, of course, have a gun in your home for self-defense. If you have a gun in your home, it makes us twice as likely that a resident at home, not an intruder, a resident at home is twice as likely to die at the hand of a gun. A resident of that home is 3 times as likely to die by suicide if there's a gun in the home. Because most means that people use, especially women, tend to do this more, taking pills or some other method like that, slashing your wrists. A lot of the people end up not dying. They're rushed to the hospital and they're saved. I've actually had that experience of rushing to the hospital with someone who had swallowed a bunch of pills, who had called me, and then I had to call the police and go into the hospital. She was saved. She was saved. If you take a gun, very often the person who's suicidal points it at their head, and once you destroy that part of your body, you have a very low probability of surviving. So I just think that it's great that we're getting at least some progress, and I hope it breaks the logjam, and that we keep doing more and more, because it's not enough by any means.
Reverend Moore, there's this very interesting question that came in through text message. What are your thoughts on hate crimes that drive gun violence and gun purchases? Reports say that Asians have become part of the US gun buying surge amid anti-Asian attacks.
Right, so this is all, there are interconnections here. And I think that's a good thing to look at. And certainly in terms of the recent shootings, it was most visible in the Buffalo shooting. That was clearly a violent white supremacist who got his hands on a weapon of war, and look at the damage he did. It's just horrifying. So yes, the hate crimes are increasing. Our society is actually losing ground on basic things like showing respect for all people, treating everybody with equality and respect. We're losing ground, and that's very alarming. The Tree of Life shooting is another example. A lot of the El Paso shooting was clearly a violent hate crime against immigrants. And so when you look at the interconnection between these dynamics, if you have an increasing amount of hate, which we do, an increasing amount of sort of energizing that hate and say, well, why don't you violently express it? Then you're going to have more and more acts of gun violence. Some of it is knocking Asians over. We all know about those stories. All of these violent things are so profoundly anti-American. I don't even say they're anti-American. They're against our basic principles. This is a country in which all people are created equal. That's in our creed. It's a country that became great because of the immigrants that came here from all over the world to try to follow the American dream. And so, we've got to make headway on both things. Obviously, if there's a hateful person out there and they don't have a gun, they can't do as much damage to the group that they're feeling hateful toward. And that's at least something. But eventually we have to return to our core values as Americans. We have to return to knowing that we're not going to create scapegoats. We're not going to, hate and disrespect people, whether they look different from us or think different from us or worship differently from us, whatever it is. Really, when you drill down and to the mass shootings I just mentioned, especially, there is I've heard it called a white lash. That is, the violent white supremacists are rebelling against the equality that was starting to get stronger and stronger right up through the end of the Obama administration. And I'm heartbroken by this. I'm outraged by it. And when any group is affected by violence, and especially by gun violence, we're going to be standing in solidarity with them. We were there when the Black Lives Matter movement was protesting against George Floyd's murder. We were there much more recently when the surge of crimes against Asians, hate crimes against Asians was surging. We had 3,000 people at a rally across the street from my office at a park there. So these are intertwined. We need to be addressing it in all of its dimensions.
Thank you. Our next question, talking about equality and immigrants. This is from Urdu News, from Moshin Zahir. Moshin, if you can ask your question, please. I think you're muted.
Yes, my question is about the First Amendment that allows citizens to bear arms. Do you think that amendment should be amended?
So I would frame my response a little bit differently than that, which is I think it needs to be understood and implemented better. So when you look at the entire Second Amendment, what the NRA always leaves off, in fact, even on their own building, they leave off this front part, this first part, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. That's the introductory clause. All right. So the amendment is about having a well-regulated militia. Okay, that's very clear from that preposition there, from that phrase that leads into it. Only then does it say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So this was really up until probably, I guess, the Heller decision in the 1980s. The Supreme Court was always interpreting this in the context of that first clause, which is to say that the federal government could not say that a state couldn't have its own armed militia, meaning today we call those the National Guard. All right. And so it's really about federal versus states' rights. And so when you really drill down and look at the context, at the research, that Second Amendment is about keeping an armed militia as your state's National Guard. Well, now there's no question about that. Every National Guard in every state has plenty of weapons. They are paid for by the state. No one challenges that. And all of the arms of law enforcement work together. We know that if there's a natural disaster or something, even if there's some episode of violence and the National Guard is sent in, we all know that that is a well-regulated militia. What we have today, because of the NRA's butchering of this amendment, is a Wild West situation. Everything is a showdown at the OK Corral. And everybody, they're saying America is safer the more guns we have. I think the evidence is right in front of our eyes. The more guns we've had, the more the gun violence epidemic surges out of control. This is not a speculation. We are seeing it before our very eyes. The rate of gun violence is skyrocketing. And that goes in parallel with the skyrocketing 500% increase in the number of guns being sold in this country.
Thank you.
Our next question is from the Turkish journal, Selçuk Akar. The question is, should schools arm teachers and guards? What are your suggestions for the parents who have kids in New Jersey schools?
So, no, I don't think it's a good idea to arm teachers. I know the governor of Texas just signed something to try to speed that up in his state. Again, it's really a myth. Lots of places, going all the way back to Columbine, by the way, one of the early mass shootings in recent history, there was an armed guard on duty. They were at that high school and he couldn't stop it. So to arm teachers, they don't have the training. They love their children. And some teachers have put their lives on the line when a mass shooter is around. But to expect them to be the defenders of those children using guns, that's crazy. Now, I'm not saying there are times that a shooter is stopped by another person with a gun. It's actually rare. It's actually rare. One of the most recent years I've studied and researched, when there were 40,000 gun deaths in America a few years ago, do you know how many of those were ruled to be justifiable homicide, meaning they were used in self-defense to protect yourself? 200. 1/2 of 1%. It does happen sometimes, but it's rare. So to add more guns with teachers who don't want to be armed, bearing those guns. My wife works at a school. She doesn't want to be anywhere near a gun. And so I think that's wrong-headed. Now, I see the second part of the question. And by the way, an armed guard is a little bit better. When the most recent spate of the shooting in Uvalde took place, by the way, the Princeton police, right here in Princeton, it's a relatively safe town, but they actually went in uniform to all the schools in the area for the next few weeks. That actually, it's not so much that they're actually using their guns. They could, they're well trained. It's not so much that, is that having a uniformed officer there is a deterrent with a police car visibly out front. So if somebody is thinking of doing a shooting and they start approaching the school, they might be deterred by that. That makes more sense to me. But to arm teachers, no, I think that's a no-starter, no-brainer. What are your suggestions for the parents? Well, one thing is to have conversations with your child and say, you know, we, the adult generation, we are failing you. I think we need to admit that. Schools need to be a safe place. And so you can't turn them into fortresses though, but common sense measures, as we've discussed. For example, at my wife's school, you can't just walk in any door. There's only one door that members of the public can get into that school by. To get in, you have to hit a buzzer, a camera is showing who you are, you have to state who you are and why you want to go into the school. And only then does the buzzer buzz to let you into the school if it's deemed legitimate. That's common sense. Those are the kinds of deterrent measures that we can take. Arming more and more people is often just going to make the situation worse.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge that we have a comment from Kimi Wei. It's not a question, it's a comment. I just want to acknowledge that. There is another question here. It was texted to me. If NJ is ranked second and third lowest, how can we influence other states to follow suit? Essentially, how can we deal with it as a society?
That's a good question. And one reason I started with the example of what happened when we successfully preserved New Jersey's assault weapons ban against the NRA's effort to rescind it, is that I think did have an effect well beyond our borders. I think that was a big inspiration because we proved that the stranglehold of the NRA could be broken. And I think that as we pass more and more strong common sense laws, I think that can be a model and an inspiration. I don't know if there's a direct organic connection. I will say something that Governor Murphy has been doing that I think makes a lot of sense is trying to work within regional groupings of governors. So example, there's a mid-Atlantic grouping that includes New Jersey, states from New Jersey up to New York State. So 6 or 8 states are in that. So for them, when the law enforcement from those states gets together and says, are there ways we can stop the amount of illegal guns that are being trafficked? They can do that collaboratively. So I think that's something to be encouraged. And so, you know, but there again, New Jersey can sort of be a shining light. You know, I'm clergy, as you can see, by having RAB in front of my name. And so we talk about the city on a hill, the light shining in the darkness. I think New Jersey can be exactly that for creating a context, environment in which everybody is safer by having common sense gun safety laws.
Okay. Is there any other question from the reporters? Otherwise, I have my own question to ask, if you may allow me. So, New Jersey Governor Murphy has strengthened the gun laws in the state recently, right? And that includes limiting ammunition magazines to
Right.
10 bullets from 15, down from 15. What is the strategy? What is the strategy there? How did we come up with 10? I mean, 10 bullets, that's still a lot. You know,
Right.
if you fire that gun with 10 bullets, that's still tantamount to having a massacre. Yeah. So where do we come from that
Right.
law? Yeah.
Right, that's a good question. So why that number was arrived at is that, and actually one of the first times this was noticed was the shooter who shot former Representative Gabrielle Giffords some years ago. But it's been true with other mass shooters. The best time to try to stop their shooting is when they're reloading. So let's say they have a 30 bullet magazine. There are bullet magazines that go all the way up to 100, by the way. About a weapon of war. Who needs 100 bullets? You're going to need for sure. Let's say
Reverend Moore,
damage is done.
could you repeat that last part? You were
Yeah.
cutting in and out.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, that's
So
okay.
and we only have DSL at my office, so sorry about that, by the way.
Not at all.
So let's say that you had a 30 bullet magazine. You're going to do a lot more damage before you've used up all the bullets in your magazine, all 30 of them, than if you only had 10 bullets in your magazine. So one could make an argument that maybe 10 is still too many, but you know, we had to land somewhere that was sort of not zero, you know, a lot of hunters, for example. Why do I have to reload my hunting gun so often, type of thing. So I think that was arrived at as sort of a relatively low, but you can do a lot less damage if you can only shoot 10 bullets and then have to stop and somebody might tackle you and stop the shooting.
Thank you. Our last question is again from Mohsin. I'm just going to read it. What are the chances that New Jersey pass a law to raise age 21 to buy a gun?
I think they're fairly good. As I said, my own assemblyman is a co-sponsor of that in the New Jersey Assembly, one of my assemblymen. Actually, I think Assemblywoman Jaffer, who's the other one, is also a co-sponsor. So I think they're fairly good. And one of the reasons I think that is there's been a lot of attention paid to the fact that a lot of these mass shooters are young people under 21. You know, two of the most recent ones, as you know, were both by 18-year-olds, one of whom went out and bought an assault weapon on his birthday or the day after his birthday, and then went out within a day or two and did the mass shooting in Uvalde. So, you know, I think that people are hungering for things that are more decisive. I wish the bipartisan legislation in the Senate had included that, because I think that would have been a very clear way. More and more research is showing that, in fact, the brain of a younger adult under 21, between 18 and 21, that brain is more prone to rash behavior. There are fewer impulse controls in a person of that age. And hence, we see a preponderance in recent years of people that are acting out and doing mass shootings are in that young adult group under 21. So let's go ahead and make that a national law as well. But I think there's a good chance that it's going to pass in New Jersey.
Great. So we have come to an end. Thank you very much, Reverend Moore, for this wonderful discussion. This is such an important issue to talk about. Thank you all for reporters and editors for joining us today. We will send out the recording today or first thing in the morning. We greatly appreciate you all. Till the next press briefing. Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.